Hi everyone, so welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video we will be going to discuss about bean creation exception in a Spring Boot application, and what is this bean creation exception is, which is appearing in a Spring Boot application basically, and why it occurs, and how we are going to fix it. So all these things we are going to discuss in this session. So let us first understand here that what is bean creation exception. So let me move to the next slide. So bean creation exception, a kind of exception, right? So when you are starting your Spring Boot application, right? So once the Spring Boot application will start, then what will happen? Basically, a Spring container will start when the Spring Boot application will start, and this container will create and manage the bean object automatically. We know that Spring is a framework, right? And this Spring framework will create and manage the bean object automatically, right? And it will manage the dependencies amongst the bean object automatically. What will happen if the Spring framework cannot create a bean due to configuration issue, dependency problem, database connection failure, or coding mistakes? Then what will happen? It will throw bean creation exception. So like below example, what it is saying, that error creating bean with the name employee service, invocation of init method failed, right? So now we have seen that what is bean creation exception. So I will summarize this. When you start the Spring Boot application, so we know that Spring container is the responsible person who is taking the responsibility to create and manage the Spring beans automatically, and it will manage the dependency among them. If the Spring container cannot create a bean due to some of the issue like dependency problem, database connection failure, or coding mistakes, then on that situation the container will throw the bean creation exception. So let us see what will happen when you start the Spring Boot application. So when you start the Spring Boot application, then Spring container will start automatically, right? So and the container, we can say that Spring container will perform some of the steps in sequence. That is nothing but it is known as the life cycle of the bean, right? So initially when the Spring Boot application will start, the container will do the following things behind the screen, right? It will just do the component scanning. Means what will happen? Basically in your Spring Boot application, first it will scan the packages to find the classes which is annotated with @component, @service, @repository, @controller, @rest controller. So might be you are developing one Spring Boot application, and this Spring Boot application will have some controller, REST controller. Along with the REST controller, it will have some service class, it will have some repository class, it will have the component class which is available inside your application. We know that the component class will be annotated with @component, service class will be annotated with @service, repository will be @repository, controller @controller, and REST controller @rest controller. So what will happen once the Spring Boot application will start? It will start scanning the packages to find the classes annotated with @component, @service, @repository, @rest controller, @controller. So once the classes will be discovered which is available inside the packages, then what it will do, it will go to the next step. And what is the next step is available over here? That is nothing but it is the bean creation. At the bean creation step, what will happen? The Spring container will create the bean, right? So how it will create the bean? Assume that you have the service defined inside your application, and the service is annotated with @service annotation, right? We have an employee service. So what the Spring container will do is Spring container will create the employee service object, and after creating the employee service object, it will store this employee service object inside the application context object, right? After this step will be completed, assume that like this service, you have the repository, it will create one bean for repository, it will associate that repository object with application context object and make it available for the application context object. Now what will happen? It will go to the next step, that is known as dependency injection. So in the third step, that is known as dependency injection, it will manage the dependency among the bean instances. Assume that you have one employee service, you have the department service. So employee service will be somewhere have a dependency on the department service. So on that situation, it will manage the dependencies internally. The container is very smart enough to do these things. So it will manage the dependency between these two objects. One is the employee service and second is the department service. So this is the way that it is going to handle the dependency injection. So one dependency injection also it can handle by using a constructor injection or setter injection or something like that, and through which it can perform the dependency for one particular object to another object, right? And the next step is the initialization step. After the dependencies, whatever required among the beans will be injected, what the container will do? Container will initialize the bean using the following method. One is the @post construct method, and it will use @post construct annotation, and it will use init method. Under the init method, it can just initialize the bean. The second way to initialize the bean, either it can use the initializing bean interface, and the third way to initialize the bean, it can use the custom init method and it can initialize the bean. If any initialization will be fail, right, then what will happen? It will throw the bean creation exception. And the last step, that is nothing, that is the ready state. Once all these step, component is scanning, bean creation, dependency injection and initialization, all these steps will be completed, then Spring beans will be ready to use. We can say that it is a life cycle of the bean through which every bean has to pass in their life cycle phases, right? Scanning of the component, bean creation and dependency injection, initialization and ready state. So all these state has to be happen for any bean when the Spring Boot application will start. Now let us see with some examples when the bean creation exception will happen. The first example we will see when there is an exception, runtime exception will be there inside the constructor. So on that situation, it will throw the bean creation exception. Assume that you have a constructor and this constructor is available inside the employee service class, and there is a runtime exception is coming inside this constructor. Then what will happen? It will throw the bean creation exception. Let us assume, let us start. This is a demo Spring application, and here is a department service, right? Let me just check what is happening in department service. Okay, here we have to define the employee service, create a class employee service. Let us create a class employee service over here. So once we will create the class employee service, we have to annotate with @service, through which the Spring will understand that this is a service class. And under this particular service, assume that we are using public employee service, and under this employee service it is throw new runtime exception. Okay, that's it. Let me just check here. Assume that this is not having any dependency over here. I don't want to create a circular dependency. Let me check that. Okay, there is no circular dependency. So when the employee service class will be instantiated, then what will happen here? Runtime exception has to be thrown inside the constructor, and the expectation is the particular code from line number 9, it has to throw the bean creation exception. So let me start the demo application and check that how it is going to throw. Okay, now you can see there is a bean creation exception came into the picture, and what is the error it is throwing here? You can check. Unsatisfied dependency injection error, creating bean with the name departmentService, unsatisfied dependency injection. This is the one, and the cause is the bean creation exception. Error, creating bean with the name employee service defined in this particular class. So what it is trying to say that when it is trying to create the employee service bean, right, then on that situation it is getting some issue, and the constructor itself is throwing the runtime exception, and which is getting wrapped into the bean creation exception. So in this is the one scenario through which we can identify how the bean creation exception came into the picture. And the solution for this is we need to initialize the particular bean, whatever the beans we are declaring, in a proper way, right? If we are not throwing the runtime exception in this place, let me check that what is the outcome again here. Okay, now there is no any exception, right? It is starting the application, demo application, and there is no exception came into the picture in this case, right? These are the something different which is coming from the logger, but there is no exception I can see in the log which will create the problem. So the application is starting successfully in this scenario. Okay, so now let us see the second scenario in which condition the bean creation will come into the picture. So the second scenario is the circular dependency. Assume that you have an employee service and department service. So employee service bean you are declaring inside the department service class, and department service bean you are declaring inside the employee service class. So these two classes will be circularly dependent to each other. There is a circular dependency between these two classes, and the Spring container will not be able to understand which bean instance has to be created initially. Either it has to be employee service or it has to be a department service. Let us go to the IntelliJ and check that are we going to get the same exception or not. We have a department service. Let me check. Here is the department service. We are defining the employee service as a bean, as a dependency inside the department service, and we have an employee service, and inside the employee service we are defining @AutoWire, and here we have to use departmentService, right? Now let me remove this constructor and let me start the application. Now you can see, let me just go to the initial stage from where the exception came. Bean currently in creation exception. So bean currently in creation exception is a subclass of bean creation exception. Error creating a bean with the name department service. This kind of exception you are getting. Requested bean is currently in creation. So the container is confused which bean has to be created first, either it is an employee service or department service, and due to that the circular dependency came into the picture and it is not able to understand what needs to be done. So that's the reason. What is the resolution for this? That we have to define the dependency in a proper manner, and we have to just check the design and correct the design document for how the employee service will be dependent with the department service. What will be the mapping between these two services, right? Now let us see on the next scenario, that in which scenario you will get the bean creation exception. The second scenario is this one, circular dependency, and this is the third scenario. Just ignore this, dependency injection failure. So this is also the cause in which the bean creation exception will come. So if you are using some of the services and you are using some of the dependencies and some of the annotation is missing the dependencies whatever you are using, then on that situation you will get no such bean definition exception, which is basically wrapped by bean creation exception. So let me just give an example for this one. Let me just use a repository service here. So we have an employee repository which is already available here, and it is a kind of interface. In my application we have an employee service, and this employee service, on this employee service I can say that employee repository is defined. Now if I will just start this application, we have an employee service, and on this employee service employee repository is dependent on this employee service, and we have the employee repository as an interface type. Everything is correct here. We can see that inside one class there is another class reference we are using, and in this case we should not get any bean creation exception. So let me check that it is going to throw the bean creation exception or not, or the exception which is mentioned over here. No such bean definition exception. Let me check. Okay, so we are getting this exception, no such bean definition exception. And the description, by looking into the description of exception, what it is trying to say, no qualifying bean of type employee repository is available. Expected at least one bean which qualifies as AutoWire candidate. Okay, so we are using employee repository and we are using AutoWire, but it is saying that it is not a qualifying bean, right? And we are not there is no such bean definition. No such bean definition exception means, I mean, that it is not considering this as a bean, and that employee repository bean life cycle is not completed properly. Why it is happening? Because the repository, it should definitely has to mark @repository. So if we are marking @repository, then it will be considered as a bean, and the life cycle of this employee repository bean will be completed successfully. While running this employee service where we are using the employee repository, because one of the annotation we are missing, and due to that it is saying that it is not a qualifying bean. Now next thing is the post construct failure. So let us see that by using a post construct failure how we are going to get the bean creation exception. So assume this is the employee service class, and we wanted to do some initialization inside this employee service class. So we have to use @post construct annotation, and we have to use public void init method, right? Init method we have to use, and we have to just provide some SOUT initialization what I am going to do inside this init method. I am going to declare int y equal to 10/0, right? What will happen here? The arithmetic exception will come at this line number 13, and immediately it will throw some exception, and due to that the initialization for this particular block will not be completed, and it will just land into the bean creation exception. So let me run this application. Now you can see here the arithmetic exception came into the picture inside the init method under the post construct, and we will see the bean creation exception error creating bean with the name employee service. So the solution for this is that we need to just initialize the method in a proper way, so that there is no issue came into the picture during the initialization of this, and there should no exception. After that there is no bean creation exception will come into the picture. So if I will just remove this step, then what will happen? Let me check. Now the application is starting. Immediately restarting the application is started successfully. There is no any issue. So due to this the bean creation exception was coming due to the arithmetic exception, and the initialization of this particular statement has not been completed successfully. And for the troubleshooting we need to check the annotation, we need to check the scanning, data source, properties, constructor, all those things we need to verify, and after that we will be able to resolve bean creation exception successfully. So this is the thing from my side, how we need to handle the bean creation exception if it is coming inside the Spring Boot application, and how we have to resolve it. So guys, if you are finding that this session is helpful for you, please go ahead and like this video and subscribe this channel. Thank you for your time, and thanks a lot.